All right,
All right.
seeing that recording has started. Thank you, John, for all of your hard work. I want to welcome everybody to the January RAC meeting. First, let's do the call to order. John, if you don't mind doing the honors for the roll call.
Sure. Mike Leibowitz,
Here.
Mahalia Fernando, not here. Cole Stout,
Here.
Solomon Chen,
Here.
Leonard Edwards, Lucas Savosky,
Here.
Brian Meyer, Dina Passman,
Here.
Pat Sheehan, see you, Pat. Brandon Wu.
Here.
All right. You have a
Thanks.
forum. You're all set.
Thank you, John. So before we get started with the meeting, I want to first welcome first say Happy New Year to everybody and welcome our newest members to the RAC, Solomon Chen, Leonard Edwards, and Brandon Wu. As I mentioned earlier, we certainly look forward to working with you. And all I can say is please feel free to jump right in. And so this is we're very excited to have you. And we have a lot of, I think, meaningful and exciting things that we're working on starting at this meeting tonight and our agenda for RAC and moving forward. So on that note, John, if you don't mind facilitating any public comments or people that want to speak, that's now that the floor will be theirs.
Sure. Does anybody not on the RAC, any members of the public want to make any comments? If you want to use the raise your hand feature in Teams.
Hi, can you hear me?
Is that Tina?
No, I'm sorry. This is Steve Kaplan.
Oh, Steve, yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
You're
good.
you're on two devices, so there's a bit of a
It
feedback.
shouldn't be. Boy, that's unfortunate. I'm not.
I'm gonna mute Steve. I'm gonna mute one of them,
Great.
and then hopefully that will take care of the issue.
Does it?
Okay, try it now.
It doesn't. Does it? Not sure.
It's a little better.
A little better. I'll talk slowly. Is this better?
That's better.
Okay, I had my volume control up. Sorry about that.
No
Okay,
worries.
Steve Kaplan, and I'm a member of the Accessibility Advisory Committee. Was on the bus transformation project and also the Better Bus project, and I'd like to talk about the budget. In dealing with the budget, of course, we have two pieces. We've got the cost piece, and we also have the revenue piece. And so I think it's time, as we all agree, for us to go into crisis mode, which is to look at both of these pieces. And in thinking about the revenue side, which is not something we normally think about when we think of budgeting and cost control. Some things such as, for example, right now on weekends, Metro is charging only $2 to go to Dulles Airport. It's probably the least expensive ride in the world to an airport, and that's an area that should be taken a look at, because especially with the number of visitors who use the system on weekends, to make it advantageous to MetroCard readers who have weekly plans, perhaps make that free or make that very low price, and to others, let's bring in some revenue there. Another area is to implement the positive revenue changes from the Better Bus project surveys. There are some items there that are not additional cost, but they're actually going to bring in money, such as by expanding or returning the 42 bus service on Connecticut Avenue. We're going to bring back a lot of the embassy employees that left the system. Running a bus down Massachusetts Avenue will generate more revenue than cost because that will be the only transport overnight into that area. Taking a look at expanding the 24-hour bus service that's going to be running to cover areas outside of those particular service areas will bring in revenue. Um, Getting more people to use the Metro cards, of course. I personally would change it to a cumulative system. I think many people who don't currently have cards don't want to pay the weekly fare. They're afraid that there'll be weeks when they just won't use the system and they're going to be charged. So consider going to, let's say what London uses, which is kind of an oyster system, they call it, where it's kind of pay up to a particular amount. You don't use the system 1 week or you use the system for only one ride. We're not charging, there's no charge, there's the maximum charge. I think that would encourage a lot of the people who currently are holding back getting Metro cards, and particularly bus Metro cards, to at least have the cards. And once they have the cards, there's more of a likelihood that the fare will be paid, if you know what I mean. I'm running out of my time, but from a cost standpoint, it's time, I think, to take a look at the big expenditures, even if they've been budgeted and even if they've been approved. A good example are these huge readers, informational readers that are currently being installed on the buses. They're very expensive. And I have a question whether they're appropriate, particularly in the front because of the terrible glare they're causing. But that's a different kind of question. Because of their expense, even though they've been approved, it's time to consider curtailing this kind of contract, as well as other work. I think the general manager's office might want to set up a almost like a cost control area, at least for the next 4 or 5 months, where everything that's major gets reviewed, regardless of approval or not. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, the other hand I see raised is Tino Calavia.
Yes, thanks, John. During yesterday's Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting, some AAC members asked when to advocate during WMATA's hearing. Well, I noted that first come the hearings by the legislators in Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. Those legislators need to hear from us, the constituents who live in their jurisdictions. As a local voter, each of us should press for more funding for WMATA to be able to overcome any drastic shortfalls or any shortfalls at all. WMATA's budget must first be rescued from the fiscal cliff that many foresee. Then afterwards, will it make logical sense to advocate for the best bus, rail, and adequate Metro access services? Thanks, John.
Thanks, Tino. Okay. Seeing no one else, Mike, I'll turn the floor back over to you.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Steve and Tino, for your definitely food for thought and enlightening comments. I really appreciate it. And definitely I was taking notes on that, so we'll probably hear more about it. So let's move on to our agenda, and we're going to go into our meeting tonight is going to be going to focus on two things. We're going to finalize our letters to Virginia, kind of what Tino was talking about, Virginia, Maryland, DC, and federal entities, and solidify our public relations plan. And we're also going to discuss a subset of the general manager's proposed budget involving Metro fares, bus and rail. As you know, and I'm rehashing for some of our newer members, Metro is facing a significant budget gap due in part to subsidy caps in Virginia and Maryland, as well as other funding issues in DC and federally, resulting in potentially disastrous service cuts. During the last board meeting, the board focused In large part, after the presentation on the service cuts or proposed service cuts, the board focused on potential fare increases to, if nothing else, potentially get Metro's fare structure in conformity with other transit systems. So tonight we are fortunate to have some guests from staff at, I think, McPherson, is that correct?
Yes.
Hi, thank you. It's from Metro's Office of Strategic Initiatives to discuss the service cuts and fares and to answer any questions from the RAC. Now, one thing that I'm asking is that you focus the presentation on fares, because I think it's one area where the RAC can make an informed recommendation to the board and be most helpful to the board. Typically, in my opinion, it seems like the RAC gets the fire hose treatment with lots of information on everything, and particularly with the time we have, it diminishes our ability to influence and shape the process in really a meaningful manner. So tonight, I'd like to focus mostly on fares and see where the discussion takes us. My goal is to come out of this with an informed recommendation from the RAC to the board on whether the RAC supports some fare or some level of fare increase, at least in principle. It doesn't have to be like exact numbers or anything like that. And I don't think we would expect to get to that, but at least in principle, and any reasons that we might have a recommendation. And again, to our new members, feel free to get creative and speak your mind. You can use the raise hand button and I'll moderate us down the list so everybody can speak. And on that note, I'll like to turn it over to McPherson. If you have a presentation, please go ahead. Appreciate your time.
If I could just put in one quick plug, and Mac is joined also by Mark Irvin, who is the director of our Office of Strategic Initiatives. Just so everybody is sort of on the same page and has the same information of what's being proposed, Mac is going to run through a few slides that include our proposed changes and reductions in service. We'll go through them quickly. Like you said, don't want to get hung up on that particular aspect, but I don't know that everybody has gotten the chance to review all this information. So then, and then we can do a little bit deeper dive into fares. So we'll go quick.
Great, thanks, John, and thanks everybody else.
All right, can you all see Mac's screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mac Hughes Cromwick. I'm a Senior Operations Research Analyst in the Office of Strategy and Policy at Metro. It's nice to be here with you tonight. We'll just start with our cover slide on, as many of you know, why transit is so important to this region, for businesses, for the environment, for the economy, et cetera, and for safety. Just briefly, as our general manager has noted, this proposed budget is not what many of us would have liked to propose, but it is a reflection of the financial situation that Metro is currently in. Briefly, overviewing the service cut impacts, Metrobus would see an elimination of 67 lines and a reduction of service on 41 lines. There would be service reductions on Metrorail as a result of this proposed budget, including a 10 p.m. system closure, as well as approximately 10 stations to be closed and turnbacks on the Red Line and Silver Lines. As a result of these reductions in fixed route service, there'd also be a reduction in the Metro Access service area. Fares, which is what we will be talking more in detail about tonight, there would be a 20% general increase in fares and in parking rates as a result of this proposed budget. To talk a little bit of background, this slide shows the distribution of Metrorail trips and revenue by fare paid. Due to the fare simplification that we implemented this fiscal year, Almost 50% of all trips are now the base $2 fare. You'll recall that we eliminated the peak and off-peak fare differential and standardized the base fare at $2 at all times. This slide puts Metro's bus and rail fares in context with some of our regional peers, excuse me. Regional bus fares currently range from $0 to $2. Post-pandemic, several regional operators made the decision to either go zero fare, for example, Dash and Fairfax Q, or to lower their fares. For example, Ride On lowered their fares from $2 to $1. Metro rail fares are comparatively lower than regional commuter rail fares, which is shown on the table to the right. So for example, a trip from King Street, Alexandria to L'Enfant Plaza is $3.55 on Metro, and that's compared to $7.10 on VRE. This slide compares Metro's fares with national transit agency peers. We've recently seen other agencies increase fares either this year or last year. For example, New York MTA increased their base fares from $2.75 to $2.90 last summer. TriMet in Portland has a 12% increase planned for this year. And as well as BART in the San Francisco Bay Area has a 5.5% increase planned. Metro's base bus and rail fare of $2 is lower or in line with many of our peer agencies. Now moving specifically to the FY25 proposed fare increase. As I mentioned before, the proposal includes a 20% increase across the board, resulting in a base fare of $2.40 for Metrobus and Metro Rail. It would also result in a maximum fare of $7.20 on Metro Rail. So you can see the proposed fares on the right side compared to the current fares on the left. Parking rates would also increase and be priced at a range from $3.40 to $5.95, depending on the facility. Metro access fares would increase as well, but remain capped at twice the proposed base fare, or $4.80. This slide details our pass prices on the left and the proposed prices on the right. Current pass prices are not connected to specific fare levels and haven't really been adjusted after previous fare changes. This proposal proposes linking our pass prices with our maximum rail fare, and the goal is really to give more value for the longer pass duration. And so you can see on the right side how the pass prices are a reflection of the proposed fares.
I have a quick question before we move to the next slide, if I might.
that actually concludes my discussion of fares.
So it's a good time for questions.
So happy to hear them.
What percent of total revenue comes from pass sales versus regular fare?
I have an appendix. I have a slide on this somewhere. I believe it is around 10% associated with passes and 90% associated with stored value.
Great, thank you.
We can come back with some more specifics on that.
So for anybody else in the rack, feel free to use your raise hand function, and we'll just go down the list and get everybody so you can make sure we talk. I just see Dina is next. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's really interesting to see the fares compared, across other large metropolitan areas. I think one thing that I missed, because I didn't join the rack until I think midsummer, was how we got to the $2 fare, which is, as we know, it's quite low. And given our funding structure in, particularly in the United States, I would say overall, seems like it's not really feasible, as you've demonstrated. So how did we get there? And now we're coming back here because it seems like things happened kind of quickly.
So this is Mark Irvin. It's a good question, and it perhaps happened in different ways on bus and rail. So the bus fare was $1.75 until 2017 when it increased to $2. And then we had two different rail fares. We had a peak minimum fare of $2.25 and then an off-peak and weekend minimum fare of $2. And one of the things that happened a couple years ago was attempting to make free rail bus transfers, so you could get up to a $2 credit from rail and bus. So as part of this fare simplification that was approved last year, we and the board approved having a single base fare for all of rail and bus as $2. And that would be simple for customers. It would make it easy to transfer between.
As a customer, I love it. Don't get me wrong. And I go between the bus and rail all the time. So I understand, that's a great overview. But I mean, at that point where people are like, this isn't really a long-term fix. I'm just trying to, it doesn't really matter, I guess, because we are where we are. But how do we do this better than we did it before if we go back to higher fares?
I think there's certainly looking at the peer agencies and the fact that we haven't done a general fare increase since 2017 across the board. We think there is some room to raise fares, and you see, peers have done it 5% to 12%. And I think that's in line with the idea there is a fare increase proposed in the budget. I know it's up to the board what level that ultimately is at, but as part of a solution that has, solution to the big problem, we think fares do play a role in getting more revenue from fares is part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dina, for that question. We're going to go with Patrick, and then followed by Solomon. So Pat, go ahead.
Great. Michael, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. My audio wasn't working before. So I don't know if this is on the slides. I can't see the slides being visually impaired. But what we're looking at as far as the increase in fares for bus and rail, how much revenue are we looking at? I know we've got a $750 million shortfall. So what are we talking about as far as cutting into that amount? What's the bottom line number that we're looking at?
We estimated approximately $29 million associated with increasing fares and parking rates.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. And I would say, I don't know if Phil and other members of the AAC are here or is able to participate, but I would say that the 480 increase for Metro Access wouldn't be, is something that the AAC, I think, would be in line with. I was afraid that when you had a 20% increase in overall fares, I think that's what you said, that would be a 40% increase in Metro Access. So I'm pleased that it didn't jump from, $4 to $10 or something like that, but from 4 to 480. So thank you.
Just one more detail on the revenue estimate, which is important to note is, anytime we increase fares, we expect that's going to come at some cost to ridership, but a big factor here is the service cuts contemplated are so severe that we expect to lose a significant amount of ridership from the service cuts themselves. And so this estimate takes into account the lower expected ridership and revenue from the dramatically reduced service. So if we had a similar fare increase without any service changes, the expected revenue increase would be higher.
Thank you, Pat. If they answered your question, I'm going to move on to Solomon.
Hi, thanks for taking the call. And this is my first time on the rack. I joined in last December, so happy to be here. I had some questions about sort of that $6, those who are kind of taking those longer trips. And in particular, I'm just envisioning as my employer uses Smart Benefits, and so trying to tap into kind of those inelastic customers, which I think would be the prime source for increasing revenue, which is when they would continue ridership habits, but obviously pay more in the increased fare. So I'm curious if you all have done estimates on one, kind of how Smart Benefits and enrollment in that has kind of changed throughout these past years. And additionally, if there's any numbers on kind of as workflow changes and as riders take longer trips or kind of take trips during peak commute hours, how many of those trips are from Smart Benefit linked cards?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that our analytics group has spent some time looking at. We know that federal customers have not returned to Metro at the same pace as other customer segments. And so today, federal riders make up a smaller share of our overall trips. We estimated that now that share is 6% compared to 12% before the pandemic. At the same time, we've seen trips on weekends come back at a much higher level than trips that are taken during peak periods. I think on Sundays we've even seen back to pre-pandemic levels travel. So there's definitely been a shift in trip distribution that has affected our revenues, as you said. More weekend trips when we're charging $2 fare, less trips on peak periods when we're charging up to $6. So I think that's an accurate interpretation.
Yeah, that makes sense in terms of the federal return. But I know that I don't know. I'm very curious about the kind of use of Smart Benefits, which I understand is you don't have to necessarily be federal, like you can be a nonprofit or other company, you can utilize that. So has enrollment in Smart Benefits, which I would assume would hopefully be correlated with increased use from those workforce from people in those workforces, which also would be, I think, primarily more inelastic. Because again, if you're getting it as a benefit, a fare increase or those sort of changes would be less sensitive, I think, to those users. So I'm curious if smart benefit enrollment or usage by corporations and companies has changed or risen or decreased over time.
Yeah, we could look more at that breakout. Overall, the smart benefits share is down, but driven by what Max said, which is the big role of the federal government. And as far as elasticity, there's a lot of diversity in smart benefits, but most of the people that use smart benefits with a non-federal government employer, they're getting a tax benefit, contributing their own money, withholding from paycheck and getting a tax savings. But it's generally less common to get a full subsidy from the employer.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you.
Before we get into Lucas's question for you, I have a follow-up question regarding smart benefits, if you don't mind. So has there been any, I guess, talk about kind of changing the paradigm of how smart benefits work? Because, I have it where, every once in a while, I think once every year, we fill out a form, for the federal government that kind of calculates how many trips you take. There's kind of a cap at like $270 or something like that a month. And I know a lot of people don't actually use the full amount. And when you tap the smart trips, Metro gets the money when you tap it for the trips. Has there been any conversation about changing it so that, if somebody is kind of an employee is kind of committed to 5 days a week, going in there, that the money is automatically taken from wherever it comes from, like the employer to Metro, so it's not based on taps, but just based on the monthly amount that they committed to?
So now in general, what Metro does offer, like we sell monthly unlimited passes through smart benefits, and but there is variation by employer. So some employers, including most of the big federal agencies, don't offer the unlimited passes to their employees and only offer this pay as you go. And we have actually done some work to make smart benefits better for customers. Now there's a website that we run that employers can offer. I mean, and we're trying as best as possible to work out some of the clunkiness of it. I mean, there is clunkiness to smart benefits that's driven by complying with all these tax provisions and then interfacing with all the employers, payroll systems. But I do agree, and we actually think it's an important opportunity. I mean, smart benefits, it's essentially a monthly recurring subscription program. It's really well suited in principle to an unlimited class, and getting more employers offering that to employees, we think could be a win-win for everybody, and be interested in doing more to push that opportunity.
Great, thank you. Lucas.
Yeah, I was wondering, is there any specific rationale behind like the general flat 20% fare increase, as opposed to maybe like a dynamic increase where you would be raising the price on current $2 trips, maybe 50%, and then longer trips up to the 20%?
Yeah, that's a good question. To answer it, I guess I'd go back to what we adopted this year in FY24, where we, as part of that budget, we looked at a variety of different fare structures. Zone, flat fare, etc. It was really a chance to do a full evaluation of the structure. We came out of that recommending the distance-based structure that we have now, without any of the peak and off-peak differentials. And what we have now, sort of the 3-to-1 ratio of minimum to maximum fare, we found to be a good bandwidth for the system, and did some comparison on a global scale to see how other distance-based transit agencies set up their minimum to maximum fare ratios. And so that kind of informed us. Another key consideration with doing targeted adjustments like the one you mentioned is equity. So if you were to only increase the base fare, you would be really impacting bus riders and rail riders who take short trips. And you wouldn't be, you would sort of be leaving out the customers that are taking longer trips. And so with this proposal, it really was sort of designed to impact all of our customers equally. And that's what the 20% across the board does. If you were to make adjustments just to the minimum fare or just to the maximum fare, those would have different revenue implications, but really they would affect different customer segments. So it's really just a policy decision in terms of like, what are the customer segments that you want to target? And so, as I said, this proposal presents an equal fare increase on all customers.
Just to close that out, I mean, that's something we certainly could do, and the board could consider options to say treat different parts of the fare structure differently or treat the max fare differently. But to the extent the thinking behind the GM's proposed budget, it was really, since last year we did this big fare restructuring, which affected customers differently, there wasn't as much value in trying to reopen that again and really trying to separate the level of fares versus the structure of the fares. And once you start doing different increases to different customers, you're really doing another fare restructuring it. So this is a simpler across the board increase.
No, thank you. I think that's very fair. I think just from my perspective, the hardest thing is it's like someone like myself would be much more service sensitive on a short trip versus price sensitive. So I think anything that would help to minimize the service impacts would be like specifically a preference for me, or I think a lot of people that would mostly be on bus or short trips. So.
Thank you. Brandon, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is centered on the late night rail and weekend fares, which I know are set to the base fare. So I know that right now, I think from the graph that you showed earlier, those trips make up, I think, 25% of paid trips, 17% of revenue. And I know that previously in public comment, someone mentioned that, a lot of these trips are driven from tourists on the weekends or folks who are taking potentially longer airport trips on weekends that are paying the standard too. Kind of, I guess, going off of your answer to the last question, is the reason why that 240 is the same for weekend and late night trips pretty much to preserve the FY24 fare structure where weekend and late night fares are the exact same as the base fare?
In short, yes. It's preserving basically the current structure and doing an increase on what was approved last year.
Did that answer Brandon's question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Patrick, I see your hand is up. Is that just left over from before, or do you have another question? And his hand went down. So does anybody else from the rack have a question before I get into my like 4 or 5 questions that I have? Okay, first, Mac and Mark, thank you so much for taking the time and answering our questions. I really appreciate all the work you've put into, I guess everything behind the slides, everything like that. I can definitely tell you've been balancing things like equity with kind of the financial responsibility of kind of coming up with these fair structures, and it's very evident and it's very good. So you might have already explained this, but kind of looking at the baseline scenario, if service is reasonably funded, can you please help me get a handle on how things would look in terms of ridership gains or losses in conjunction with revenue gains and losses if fares are increased by this amount? Meaning, in the baseline, say reasonably funded scenario where it gets all worked out at least to some level. If fares are increased and ridership dropped, would revenue still be reduced? Would it break even, or would it increase?
Got it. So to make sure I understand the scenario right, so this is, you're asking if we're able to maintain the current service, is that right? What would the impact of the fare increase be, or how would it be different than the 29 million that's listed here?
Yeah, because you had mentioned that, I think in passing that, some of the things we can work on with the fares might be kind of like making corrections or getting things really in order as an opportunity now because we kind of have this budget crisis. But obviously we have these drastic service cuts. I think that's ridership's going to plummet, right? So I'm just trying to think like, okay, if you do say a 20% increase or something like that, and then we want to keep it, regardless of what happens, because I know there's all these different scenarios, depending on where the budget ends up, depending on like Virginia and Maryland, DC, and everything like that. I'm just trying to think like long term, if we do that, where things would stand with a somewhat reasonably funded system.
Yes. Mac, you might be the best person to take this, maybe starting with like how much revenue we're expecting in a baseline scenario for FY25.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to our October presentation to the board where we had a slide that had a table of a range of percentages, I think from 5 to 50%. And those estimates were basically going off of a baseline without service cuts. So that table would have a better representation on what a fare increase would be expected to generate in terms of revenue without considering the ridership losses of potential service cuts. So can find that and send that.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you. I'm looking at the comparison between Metro Bus and New York's MTA, the bus service. If Metro matched its bus fare structure with MTA, can that be construed as a reasonable comparison among bus systems?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of differences among all the different systems, but the bottom level of these fare ranges, and then for some of them it's only one. They really are the local bus fare. So noting there are some differences. I mean, they are, I would say, fare-like comparisons.
Okay, so I guess I was thinking if Metro adopted, say, like the MTA is $2.90 to $7 fare rate on buses. I'm just wondering if you have calculated something like, because the reason why I'm asking this is because this is something that the board kind of brought up. You were there for the last meeting where they were talking about comparisons and thinking that I think a few of the board members mentioned that it was a little, Metro seems so low compared to some of these. So I'm just trying to see if we adopted something like the MTA's fare structure, how significant would the ridership drop be? And would that ridership drop reduce revenue or break even again or increase in revenue, depending on where things shook out?
Yeah, I mean, the general rule of thumb, and it's what we've generally seen with past fare changes and consistent with other agencies is, and I'm going to approximate it, and Matt can perhaps offer some more nuances. You know, for say a 10% fare increase, you lose something around, 5% ridership. And so there's some limit to that. If you increased to such a high level, you might start to lose more ridership than you're gaining in revenue. But, in general, we've seen that we've been able to come out with a net revenue increase. And I think we would expect that to continue up to even higher levels.
Okay, thanks. Moving to rail, would raise, I guess it's even regardless of whether the service cuts happen or not, but would rail fares beyond $6 kill basically essentially kill rail on the new Silver Line stations? Would it in terms of ridership numbers, particularly with parking lots also going up?
Well, I do know, I was looking at this the other day, if we didn't have a fare cap at $6, in theory, you could have a trip of upwards of $20 based on the distance formula that we have. I don't think anyone thinks that that's the best idea. But again, I'll go back to what I was talking about earlier, which is like the loss or the lack in recovery of some of our longer distance trips is, I think, definitely something that's sensitive. So to just increase the max fare may not be the best strategy in terms of generating that ridership recovery.
John, you were going to say something?
No, I just want to make sure that everybody understands how we compute our rail fares, right? You get charged $2 for the first 3 miles, and then however many cents for each additional mile up until you hit $6. And I think right now, I don't know, what is that, like a 7-mile trip? Okay. And then after that, essentially, you don't pay any more the further you go, right? So I guess what Mac was saying is if we didn't have that $6 cap and we just kept charging everybody, for every mile that they traveled, some trips to the, from the far reaches of the Silver Line, based on the calculation without a cutoff would be upwards of, what'd you say, 18, 20?
Over 20.
Over 20. And our fare structure in that regard, in terms of distance-based and a cap, is complex. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear on that before we move forward.
I appreciate the clarification. I'm just trying to get a handle on, I guess thinking ahead toward whether potential recommendation or indulging the board's kind of initial thoughts on, kind of getting the fares more in line or conformity with some of the other systems. And, and as someone who comes from the far reaches of the Silver Line, I think beyond $6 would be, particularly if they raise parking costs, would be, I think it would, anecdotally, would be disastrous. Speaking of, this is my last question. What would ridership and revenue look like if, I guess, Metro went to a hybrid, like truly went to a hybrid subway and commuter rail system where the weekdays operated similar to now, but but with kind of the fare increases you've been discussing. But then during the weekends, apart from maybe special events, most outlying Silver Line stations, perhaps maybe even like in Virginia, beyond Tyson's or East Falls Church, for example, those would be closed on the weekends, with the exception of maybe Dulles. Is that something that you've looked at and crunched any numbers on?
In terms of closing some parts of the system on the weekends, I mean, in this proposal, we looked at closing up to 10 stations based on low ridership, and actually looked at it in terms of trying to limit the concentrated impact in terms of proposing not closing two consecutive stations. I mean, directly to your question, I mean, I think we think that fare increases, reducing service, certainly closing parts of the system would reduce ridership quite a bit. The weekend is where we've had a lot of ridership growth, and ridership is the most recovered. I mean, even being in the business of talking about station closures, I mean, feels bad. It's a quite grave thing. And to the extent, and maybe this is the point you're getting at, we've even had to consider it. It's because, as we've talked about in the past, most of the costs of running the system aren't actually, especially when we're talking about rail, aren't actually operating the trains themselves. It's the cost of maintaining all the stations and the infrastructure. And so looking at reducing the footprint of the system, which allows us to save on some of these costs that are normally fixed and don't vary with how much service we're running, is how we ended up there. So I think what you're talking about is directionally in line with that, but certainly something we would hope to avoid in this process.
I guess the reason why I asked too is, talking to riders, probably from, I would say, Reston on out toward Ashburn, the common, no, I don't know if the numbers back this up or not, but kind of the common thought is that Metro is worthless on the weekends, because it's longer wait times. At least that's the perception of it. So I'm just wondering if it's worth even keeping, apart from Dulles, keeping like all of those stations on the weekends. But if you're saying that it's kind of negligible because of, I mean, for various things, then that's fine too. I'm just wondering if the weekend rates and the weekend ridership kind of includes kind of like these farther reach in Western Fairfax County, Loudoun County, apart from the airport.
Yeah, I mean, some stations, like you're saying, do have more of a weekday commuter profile, and some have more of a 7-day a week, all day profile. So it's the kind of thing we could certainly look more at.
All right, thank you. Those are all my questions. Does anybody have any follow-up questions from the RAC?
Could I just, I guess, take the opportunity to go over some process that might inform any further discussion you all have on this tonight? So we have a budget process. I don't think the timeline is part of the slides that Mac brought with him. But what we are planning for our board to do this month is to set a range. So any fare increase or service reduction that Metro undertakes needs to go through the public hearing process, right? And the board has to, I guess, set like a maximum sort of outside range in terms of fares and a maximum sort of worst case scenario in terms of reductions in service that we have to advertise and take out to the hearing process. That'll happen and get everyone's input in February and March. And then, they can gather that input and come back and sort of digest it all and make a decision on what the actual fare increase proposal will be. So we Timeline wise, we're expecting the board to sort of set those parameters within the next couple of weeks. So this would be the chance to weigh in on, you know, whether the parameters put forward here, the increased fares by 20%. If that's what the board approves to take out to the public, that's as high as things can go. They can always come in lower if we, you know, if the states or whoever is able to find additional funding, or we're able to, I don't know, make additional administrative cuts, or we figure out a way to find money elsewhere, but they can't go higher than what's shown. You know, so the question is what's being presented here an appropriate level to advertise and go out and talk to the public about, or are there, you know, or should it go, is it lower? Is 20% too much to take out and talk to the public? Should it be 25? You know, understanding that will set the parameters of what we can get feedback on.
Great, thanks, John. That's really helpful. Bryna.
Yeah, hi. So just to go on, I think John will be helpful to just walk through the rest of the process. So
You're breaking up a little.
So the RAC has. I'm going to drop my camera and see if that helps. Having trouble with Teams tonight. The RAC will have another, so this is an early opportunity, if I understand you, John, an early opportunity for RAC to provide some insight, collective insight, you'd have to decide what that is, before the next board meeting, which would be in January. And then it will go out for public comment. We would encourage the RAC to encourage as many of people across the network to engage around that public engagement. Is this right, John? And then it comes back to the board, and the RAC will have another opportunity to provide recommendations based on that. Is that correct, John?
That is correct. So what will happen again this month is it sets the outside boundaries of whatever Metro will do. So, for example, not advocating, if people think that, you know, what we could stand the bus fare going up to $250 versus $240. That would have to come at the beginning stage in the process for the board to consider it. If they advertise that, hey, our base fare could go up to $240, when they come back to decide on the final budget in April, $240 is as high as it can go. They can leave it at $2. They can, you know, they can raise it to $205, $210, $217 if they wanted to. So it's that kind of part now where it's parameter setting, and then, as Bryna said, after we get input from the public, and I think hopefully maybe have an idea of where we might get additional revenue subsidies, you know, from sources that aren't our riders or parkers, you know, then that discussion will occur in the spring. And, you know, I think I think obviously Metro wants to minimize the impacts of any fare or service changes on its customers. The question is, you know, how to work out that mix of additional funding, fare increases, service reductions, you know, and how that all shakes out.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Bryna. Absent any more questions for Mac and Mark, I think we can let them go. And what I propose for the RAC is that, you know, we get a new business, we can talk more in detail kind of about our thoughts regarding the fare increase and what John and Bryna just said. But for now, I just want to say thank you to Mac and Mark for really providing your expert and learned insights. This was certainly helpful. Thank you for answering all of our questions, and really appreciate you coming here and your time.
And thanks for the opportunity to discuss and hear from everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do for the RAC now meeting. Get back to my agenda. So second part of our RAC budget outreach part of the agenda. So again, thanks again to everyone who contributed your thoughts and edits to our letters. John tells me that I think the letters that we had kind of finalized or looked at should all be formatted and ready to go. John, I don't know if anyone from the social media or comm staff is here with us tonight, but if you wouldn't mind giving us an update on, kind of Metro's media plan to amplify our letters to the regional leaders and where letters stand, that'd be great.
Sure. So there is not someone, and unless I'm missing them online, I do not see someone from comms. But again, they have said they will support the RAC in terms of pushing out what you send out on, the letters to the various legislatures on social media, through our X account or whatever they call it now. And doing a press release. I will say that, so my understanding of the RAC's plan is to send letters to members of the district council, right? Because that's the legislative body for the District of Columbia. And then the relevant committees with both the Virginia Senate and House of Delegates and the Maryland Senate and House of Delegates. So I have all of the information for Maryland on who those need to go to. Virginia has not organized its committees yet, so we will not know who the recipients will be until the legislature stands up and does its organizing. But once they do that, they'll be ready to go out to them as well.
Okay, so yeah, so we have 4 letters, Virginia, at least 4 templates, Virginia, Maryland, Mayor Bowser and Council, and then Department of Transportation, so Secretary Buttigieg, with a lot of CCing to federal delegations and things like that. And the Virginia and Maryland ones would include the governors and probably Board of Supervisors, members, and things like that. So, John, I guess the question for you is, I think we can still send it out if the government affairs people have a good idea of who the appropriate addressees would be to get the Virginia going, so we don't wait until the General Assembly is convened. I think the idea is to get everything going in one big shot to everybody. So I guess the question is, do we want to implement the media plan? I don't know if tomorrow is too quick, particularly since the derailment report is coming out tomorrow. We can do it on Friday or sometime next week. I'm just trying to get your best guess of where we stand and what's feasible.
My thought would be, to send out to the people that we know now, or, maybe early next week, before the board acts on its, as soon as possible, right? Understanding like we're back from the new year, we want to put everybody on notice. But I think you are going to have to wait on Virginia to make sure that you're sending it to the right people. And so it could be I guess like a 2-step process, is to send something out beginning of next week, Monday, say, to the people that we know. And then when the Virginia General Assembly starts up and chooses its committees, then, reiterate and sort of do another round of Virginia is really crucial as, the 3rd leg or the 4th leg of the stool, And now that we know who you are, now that we know who you are, we're going to be in touch.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me. Cole, go ahead.
I think we should have those committee members soon because the General Assembly convenes next Wednesday, a week from today. And generally, once they convene, they already kind of know what the committees will be, but they're officially structured there in that beginning, right in the beginning, first day usually of the assembly. So we should be able to move quickly on that once they do convene next week.
That's helpful to know. So
Yeah,
go ahead, John.
I was told that I should get that membership by next week.
So what if we do this, John? And I'll certainly leave it up into the rack as well to kind of confirm everything. John, is Monday a feasible day to get all the letters, apart from maybe Virginia, completely formatted, ready to hit send, ready to just be like, and then, the comm staff on standby to hit go as soon as we send the letters, maybe Tuesday morning? Does that feasible for logistically for everything on your end and on staff end?
I believe so. I will follow up with them tomorrow, but I'm going to say yes.
Okay, let's do this then, and certainly open to any alternatives from the rack. My thought is, I'm going to throw it out there, is let's do Tuesday as our go date to send everything, have comms on standby, and have comms send out all their media alerts, social media, everything like that. And if Virginia has to wait till Wednesday, then it's kind of the two-headed monster process, right? We did that, and then Virginia gets theirs, and then maybe a more targeted social media and media advisory campaign where we target kind of just the Virginia local, hyper-local media, everything like that. That's what I propose. See if the rack has any alternatives, or are we good with that? Cole has a thumbs up. I think and Lucas, I think that's good enough for me. Thank you. So John, is that good for you?
Yes, I will circle back with our communications folks in the morning.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Just kind of a little bit different is I've been speaking to leaders from other transit-oriented groups in the region, and all are interested in what we are doing. We have definitely kind of taken the lead on this, and it's very noticeable. So I envision drafting kind of another letter eventually in conjunction with these other groups, and I want to include the AAC more directly, Pat, when the time comes for that. I'd also, one of the things that kept coming up is drafting up an op-ed in the Post to kind of educate the region and maybe some of the hyper-local media as well in the region on why the budget issue is so important to riders. And so I can try to write it, but does anyone else want to take a crack at writing the first draft beyond me doing it? Because I am total amateur hour. I am happy to admit that. So does anybody else want to take a crack at writing an op-ed, and we can all, and nothing's going to go out without approval from the rack, but just throwing it out there. See, and it's okay if we see none. Oh, go ahead.
Mike, I can probably take a crack at it. I mean, I have a master's in communications, so I suppose I can put that to work.
Sounds good. I had a journalism degree once upon a time, but I blew that up going to law school. So, so yeah, Cole, that would be awesome. Thank you so much for taking that on. And then we can all, send the draft out. We can kind of, take a look at it. But I trust you. I think you're going to write something awesome.
If I can be helpful in terms of finding, facts, figures, that kind of stuff. I have my network here at the building, so.
This is Pat Sheehan. There's part of this that dealing with the Metro Access portion of it that it's pretty dire. That 25% of the people that are using Metro Access could be kicked off if we go to the doomsday budget full scale. And so it has a large impact on the disability population. So I think that needs to be part of the story. And I'll be happy to get my folks as writers or me, whatever, to contribute to this too.
Thank you, Patrick. And I think as we work with some of these other organizations that are transit oriented, I think, and I talked to them, if I hope you don't mind that I mentioned that, we work pretty closely with the AAC, and that the next kind of phase of this where another letters go out, it has to include AAC very directly, accessibility stuff, because it's for all the reasons that you stated, and you
Right.
can articulate way better than I could ever do it, which is why you guys should have a big part of that one. So
Right.
we will
Happy to do
definitely.
that. Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Good.
Cole, do you have any more questions or any questions as we've kind of tasked yourself to take on this one part?
Nope, I think I'm good, and I'll try to work on that in the next 2 days and have a version to everyone by mid-afternoon on Friday.
Okay, and again, we're all volunteers. For the new people, I say this a lot, we're all volunteers. So, still you, Cole, do not stress out if it gets pushed to next week, because life happens and I get it. So moving on then, finally to the videos. And this is something John as well mentioned, is that I think that we should still provide a link to our videos in our letters. For our new members, this is the video I mentioned in my welcome email to you, where RAC members and others gave kind of these 10, 15-second snippets on what the drastic service cuts mean to us. So saying that, I will say that, and I hate to look at it, I think Solomon, you're from Virginia. We still need more Virginia representation to make it look good. So far, it's just me. So I wanted to give our 3 newest members an opportunity to contribute short video clips in line with kind of the samples you saw. With a particular ask, I think Solomon, I hope you're still on here, because you are from Virginia or live in Virginia, if I'm total voluntary, and just to consider this a request, I'm not forcing, no one's trying to shame you or anything like that, but it's more of just an ask. If you are willing to contribute a 10 to 15-second clip, please let me know, and then we can move quickly before Tuesday of next week, so we can then ask Mahalia, who is on a plane right now, to incorporate your video into the wider full video. Then we'll have more Virginia in there. But same for Leonard and Brandon. If you want to contribute as well, we can definitely use more of that. But I'll tell you this: we played this video as it currently stands to the board a few months ago. I think it was the November meeting, and John can kind of give his thoughts if he's able. But I mean, it didn't show up in the video, but in person, their mouths were like, their jaws dropped, and there was a lot of, I think one of the board members said they needed to see that video. They're telling us how important it was, and there were a lot of wows from that. So I think the video does have a really good impact, and I think it can be very impactful. And that's why in our letters, I sent you guys the template, but the letters that we have in there, we want to, we definitely want to link the legislators and to that video. So Solomon, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, when would be the kind of latest you'd need the video by? 'Cause if, as you said, Tuesday is our deadline.
Yeah, I think again, some of this is on Mahalia, and she's agreed to incorporate it into it, but we want to actually, again, the voluntary thing, we want to give her, we don't want to just throw it on her, particularly since she's not at this meeting. But I think if you can do it by is Monday morning, does that work for you? If you're willing to do it?
Yeah, I think that should be good. As I'm kind of returning to work this week, so this week might be a little bit tough, but I think there could be time in the weekend that could be good. But I'll happy to help contribute.
Okay, and certainly Brandon and if Leonard's on this, obviously we're not trying to say your same thing to you. The only reason I'm focusing on Solomon is because the Virginia one, the board even pointed out that, hey, there's not kind of like the Christmas Vacation movie when like all the lights are twinkling. And he's like, hey, the one light's not twinkling. It's kind of like, he's like Virginia. So we're gonna fix that. But thank you, Solomon. Thank you, Brandon. If Leonard's on here, same thing. Yeah, I think that'll work. And I totally get this week being kind of horrible for work and life, getting dug out of things. So thank you very much for that. Okay, any other questions on that, or we can move on beyond the budget and the outreach? Okay, so Now we're on the agenda. We're in the outreach member report out portion. This is the point of our agenda where, and I'm talking to the new members mostly, but where RAC members can tell us what they or riders in their networks observed, and this is good or bad, and provide any proposed solutions or recommendations to something that you experience or observe, or people in your network experience or observe. It's kind of like so that we can be sort of the canary in the coal mine and identify potential issues to report to the board before they get out of hand and become kind of these grating issues for people. So does anyone have anything that they've observed or want to bring up for this portion? And I'll tell you that historically over the last year, sometimes we'll have vigorous discussions on all sorts of things, and sometimes we'll have nothing. So it's fine if nobody has anything. I understand we're all coming off the holidays. So, but anybody have anything going once, going twice? Okay. Fair enough. So Bryna, go ahead. I think. Oh.
Tino's hand has been up for a while.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Tino, go ahead if you want to talk.
Yeah,
You have something to say?
Thank you very much. This is the first that I've heard that you all prepared drafts. Could you share it with the bus rail subcommittee of the AAC? We'll meet next Monday. I'd like to see it and share it with my committee and with individuals, because individuals who write to their legislators are equally effective. So thanks if you could share.
John, do you have Tino's contact information? Do you
I-
mind
I
forwarding the most recent contact version of it?
No problem.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Tino, having John do it because he has the pen on it. But we're happy. I am more than happy to send it. There's no big secret or anything like that. So happy for you to get it.
Thank you.
And thank you for your patience. I'm sorry I didn't call on you earlier on that. And thank you, Bryna, for calling it to my attention.
Sure, and I want to just thank everyone for your what a great conversation tonight, and I think you guys bring so much to the table in terms of insight, experience, perspective. We can't really y'all. Mike calls, what do you call the rack? Is that your line?
Sorry, you broke up, so I don't know what you said. So we'll go with it.
Sorry. Anyways, thank you.
Well, thank you, Brian. I really appreciate it. Let's move on to, we have two more things left. Annual report committee outreach, and then the new business. We can talk about fairs, and then for the new members, I always try to get a hard cutoff time at 8 o'clock. Hopefully we get out earlier, but we'll see where we end up. So, annual report committee, Lucas.
Okay, so I'm Lucas for the new members. I'm the chair of this year's annual report committee. So just to give you like a brief overview on the annual report. It's basically essentially like a year-end summary of stuff that as riders we've witnessed that's gone well, that can be improved upon, and it's generally just a voice for the RAC and riders in general to express kind of their feelings, their sentiment, and things we want to see improved upon or grown on. So last year, before I was a member of the RAC, was the first annual report committee, and I'll share that with you guys in the chat. And I think it really did a great job just kind of highlighting some of the things that could be improved upon in the system that I definitely say were tackled this year, and then as well as just highlighting some of the general rider sentiment and giving a good overview on that. So for this year's annual report, kind of keeping it similar, but trying to improve upon it in whatever ways we can. Generally, each of us as committee members, we just speak with a lot of riders in our areas and just gather general top concerns from them, anything that they'd like to see or anything they'd like to see proposed, and then just some, general feedback that they want to provide about the metro system. So I guess that's the other big thing is just if you can, we have a sheet going right now for anybody that's gathered feedback when you're just speaking with riders in your area. And I'll throw that in the chat now. Just putting that feedback in here and then recording it kind of anywhere you go or any conversations you have with people about the system. Just doing your best to throw that in the sheet here. And then we can use that kind of as the base for some of the major trends we saw when speaking with riders, or some of the general sentiment about the metro system in general. So we have that going. And then also I created a little bit of a survey, just really brief, a couple months ago, and it kind of just covered just maybe some things that the RAC as a whole wants to see in this year's annual report, or maybe some specific sorts of data or feedback that were recorded that they might want to see. So I'll share that with you guys as well, and you can fill that out. But for the most part, I would say, take a look at last year's annual report. I think it's a pretty significant thing coming from the RAC, and I've heard from some of the people who worked on last year's annual report and that were on the RAC that it went a long way in informing the board and just kind of improving things in general. So it's just kind of like our voice as the RAC in a more formalized way to just express all the work we've been putting in and what things riders want to see. So do any of the newcomers have any questions?
Thank you, Lucas. Really appreciate all the work you're doing for the annual report committee. And I can tell all of you that one of the things that, since I became chair of the RAC, excuse me, is to kind of increase the relevance of the RAC and, kind of do what we're doing, making it more meaningful. And I think over the last year, I think the RAC has become much more relevant in terms of the board and the community. And I think I can tell you that I think the annual report that we put out last April really was the catalyst to put the RAC more on the path toward relevance and, have our voices heard throughout the community and through the board. So I really appreciate all the work, Lucas, that you're putting into this. I know it's an endeavor. So thank you. Okay. Absent any final questions for Lucas, let's talk about fare increases. And then that's the last item we have on here now. So, I guess the question is does the RAC recommend, based on everything we've heard through the slides, our conversation today, do we recommend, or will we recommend that the board go ahead with this max 20% fare increase, or kind of in line with the proposal that that they discussed today for buses and trains, or do we, and I guess Metro Access, or do we have some kind of alternative? So I wanted to open up the floor to see where everybody stands and what the RAC thinks. So I will say this: we're talking about annual report committee. Our annual report, we asked people their top 3 concerns, and fares really didn't register with the 100 or so riders that we talked to, but longevity of the system was one of the top concerns. I think 60% of the people we talked to actually said that was a concern. So at least our report last year, that was where the riders' heads were at. So Cole, go ahead.
Thanks, Mike. I think first, I'm not. I like the percentage increase. Whether 20% is the right number or not, I think I'd leave that to the Metro staff to make that determination in this budget scenario. I don't. But do we need to make formal recommendations tonight? I know the outreach process is just going to get started when the board approves it. And I think our recommendations we might want to wait till we do some more of that outreach specifically, and like the outreach process has started for us to make our recommendations. I don't have super strong feelings about that, but that's just kind of a question I had for you, and based on kind of what we did last year.
I'll defer to John and whether it's helpful for the board to get something from us, at least even if it's just we agree that the board should continue to look into a fair increase in principle without getting into a number. But I agree with you, Cole, that, I definitely want to take, now that we just had a discussion with staff members today to talk to people, my network and things like that, and conduct my own outreach. So I guess it's more where we stand, and that's the question for John. I guess he kind of mentioned it earlier.
So again, it's a two-step process, right? This month, the board sets the parameters for fare increases and service changes. And then they hear from the public, and then they make their final decision. I guess and I would encourage the RAC to provide input at both points. One, because it is at the point that the board is making a decision is when your input is most impactful. And, I think it's fine to say, yep, we think that raising the fare by a consistent percentage across everybody is, in line with the GM's proposal. Yeah, we're in agreement with that, or we're not in agreement with that. And here are the couple things that we think should be different, right? Like, we think that the max fare doesn't go high enough or goes too high. Like we think you should keep the max fare at 6. I think that this is, in any decision-making process, setting the parameters is just as important as making the final decision, right? I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, right? But figuring out what the charges are against someone impacts the end decision. And I'll hush and let Brian say something.
No, I was just gonna say I echo John's call for kind of just generally, you don't have to something just higher, lower, somewhere, just some general impression about where you stand as a committee tonight, and then you'll come back again several more times. So, but this is a decision point for the board, so we won't meet again before they have that conversation. So thanks.
Patrick.
Michael, thank you. I would say that I think that a fair increase is something that the RAC should agree to, not to exceed 20%. And I also, in that, would say that as far as the Metro Access fare, not to exceed $4.80, I could live with that. So that would be my recommendation. But remind me, what was the downside? What did it do to sustainability? What was the impact on the ridership? Do you remember? I don't remember that number. I think I remember hearing it was going to be significant, but I didn't know what that meant.
So, and I don't know if, let me see if I can pull it up. And I'm sorry that I can't share my screen with you all, but I think when they talked about in October, as Mark alluded to, and I'm kind of stalling now while I find the slide, that if if there were, setting aside the levels of service, which is, and I can share this with you after the meeting, but setting aside the levels of service, the higher you raise the fare, the more money it generates, but the more people you drive away from the system. Which kind of
I remember it was like 10% or something. Yes. Okay.
So if a 5% increase would, a 5% increase in fares would lose 2% of ridership, but still net you about $13 million. A 50% increase in fares would lose a little over 20% of ridership, but because it's so much larger, would net about $87 million in revenue. Again, taking the other variable of service equations out of the.
Well, we were doing 20%, so that would be.
So 20%, they don't have 20% listed.
Yeah.
Here they have 25% listed, would lose 10% of ridership, which again is about half of what you would lose at 50%.
Right. Okay. And I bring that up. Oh, go ahead, John.
It would generate about $54 million in revenue.
Oh, 54. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that we need to make a decision here based on the revenue, which 54 out of 750 million isn't a lot. And what is it going to take to build if you lose that ridership? How long is it going to take you to recover that percentage of ridership? I think a long time. So Michael, back to what you said, I think I could go with 20%, absorbing the downside on 20%, but probably not any higher.
Okay, let's move on to Dina, see what she has to say.
I know this is outside of our scope, but every time I think about these cuts and losing riders, I mean, we're losing them to personally owned vehicles is my guess. And so when you're trying to compete with that and there's no barriers to using a personally owned vehicle in the city, so we've seen other cities that have zones where you can't have cars, or it increase, there are penalties for bringing cars into the city center, or increased parking costs. I mean, this is just my rant that it makes it really difficult in a position like this when you know that the alternative, and not everybody has this alternative, but for those who do, there's no real penalty for doing that. And I would say that there should be.
Thank you, Dina. Yeah, this is frustrating. I know, Mr. Posner, you have your hand up. I'll allow it. Go ahead.
You're muted, Phil.
Just to cross out that an across the board increase of whatever it is going to influence different groups differently. And so I recommend pick a number you need, but take a look. A 20% increase on a $2 fare on the weekend, or a short fare in the city, versus a 20% increase on someone that has to drive their car, park it, and pay for parking on the Silver Line, and then pays $4.50 or $5 to come in, is a lot. And I think you'll hear that from board members in Maryland and in Virginia, because they do bring it up. So I think endorsing an increase in fare as needed, but not across the board. Return on increase, and look at, if you lose everybody coming by car to the new Silver Line stations, unless you're going to shut down all those Silver Line stations because nobody's going to use them anymore, that's okay, but I think you'd have a Title VI problem. And that's it. I'm just a visitor and just pointing out things I've heard at a lot of board meetings. Thank you so much. You guys are doing a great job. And your annual report is magnificent. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate that. Cole, your hand is up. Is that from before, or do you have more?
Sorry, yeah, that's from earlier.
Okay. So, yeah, so we're at a decision point. I think that, I mean, I get what Cole was saying, but I don't know if Cole, if your kind of opinion of where we're at changes a bit, based on what John and Bryna said about at least kind of a first decision point, because I think we do need a way in at some point, at least a very caveated in principle manner, saying like, okay, because I think that the proposal that the staff created, it's very well done, but I think it's not very creative. It's kind of just all right, 20%, here's what we're going to do, where it's not talking about the realities of, I mean, I guess they have like station closures, these nebulous stations, they might close throughout certain, like the little used ones, but it's just not very creative. And I think that they didn't have some of the information we asked for in our questions to them. They didn't have kind of a more like, what would happen if this, the number crunching. So, I definitely have concerns with, just saying, okay, yeah, 20%, that's good. Because, I mean, I think Patrick mentioned, well, kind of not a drop in the bucket, but, okay, $50 million, out of 750, where does that stand? So, I keep going back to the comparison slide where, and this is what the board raised when they were at the meeting the other day, was they think they were looking at potentially getting us more comparable. But so I guess the question is, does the RAC think that 20% we can live with it, at least in principle, for something the board should approve, but definitely not over that, with a caveat that staff should be more creative in kind of addressing this and kind of have to caveat the crap out of it? Or what do you think? John, your hand is up. So
I guess I'm not sure what you mean by be creative, but if the board is going to do anything beyond a 20% flat across the board fare increase, right? Then now is the decision point that they need to advertise that. They can't come back in April and say, well, no, we want to raise these fares 25%. They can always go lower, certainly, but it's not going to So if there's some kind of creativity that you think the board or staff should bring up, this is the time to suggest those.
Two things. One, Pat, or I don't know someone's microphone's on. If they can mute themselves, or John, if you can mute them. And Pat, go ahead. Your hand is up.
Right. Thank you, John. I think that's a good point. I think that I don't like 20% increases, but it at least does give us a cap. And so if you go with this is worst case scenario that we can go moving forward. We at least, the RAC has a number. We have a number that we can discuss and we can present. And I think, Michael, that as we've said earlier with the annual report and all, the RAC is relevant, and they're asking the RAC to make a difficult decision here based on what we've seen, which isn't going to be the final decision. But I think that passing on the decision because it's difficult is not the look that we want the RAC to have. So I think the RAC needs to make a decision based on 20% higher, lower, or something. Give the board something and other individuals to chew on and react to, as opposed to we've got as much information as anybody else. I think the downside on the attrition for the ridership is not terrible, and I say $54 million, or was it $49 million, whatever it was, $29 million is, drop in the bucket kind of out of 750 million, but it's something. And so it's the RAC is doing what it can to push the ball forward in the right direction. I think that's a good step to take.
So here's my thought, then I'll open it up again for final thoughts, and we can come to a vote on our recommendation or how we proceed. But I'm inclined to agree that the 20% cap makes sense under these circumstances. The reason why is because it does bring Metro's fares a little bit closer to conformity with kind of our peer transit agencies. It's still lower, I think, than some of them, although I think we can't really compare New York's MTAs to some degree, and even Boston to some degree. But I think it gets us more in line with the norm without exceeding it. And at the same time, it still incorporates the lower level that takes into account equity, so that we're not just starting to gouge people that truly need mass transit and don't have any other option. So I think 20% is a reasonable area. I would just suggest in a recommendation that, I think, more study is needed to really consider what works best, particularly, I think, with regard to, I think they should take 2 tracks on this, and one of them was lacking in our presentation today, with the service cuts, and also with more reasonable budget, say everything gets worked out, and to see where things stand, because I think we need to think long term. So that's where my thought is that, and that's what I propose to the board, or excuse me, to the RAC, subject to all of your comments, and we can take a vote. So I see Pat and Dina, hands are up. Dina, I'll go to you first.
Okay, sorry, I know I keep saying things piecemeal, but I do just want to put in a plug for Metro collecting more detailed data on riders, because you can contemplate all of this until you're blue in the face. But if you do not know who is riding at different times of the day on different modes and on which days, then all of this is just a guess. Sure, we know that people who have lower incomes will find likely any of these increases to be a hardship or increase the hardship. But if we don't know by age, by gender, by race, ethnicity, by language use, native language, all those things, all this is a guess.
Bryna.
Yeah, sorry, I just put in the chat that I need to jump, but Dina, I just did want to note, thank you for that comment. I don't know that anyone talked tonight about the Metro Lift program. And so, John, maybe a 30-second soundbite on that might be helpful.
Sure. Everybody can still hear me, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, my laptop died, so I'm talking to an empty room, like so the Metro Lift program is a program whereby people who are eligible for inclusion in the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, are eligible to get 50% off on all Metro rail and bus fares. So base fare is $1 and it goes up to $3, based on your Smart Trip card. That eligibility and the rules of the program would remain the same whether or not our fares increase.
I don't know if that helps you, Dina. I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that program.
But I guess to Dina's point, I'm also not sure how detailed we can get in terms of who is riding the train when, without requiring a lot more data from our customers than we already collect, right?
There's a regional transit survey that could be heavily mined for data.
And John, this is Pat Sheehan with folks with disabilities who ride paratransit. We've got 36,000, of which 9,000 could be dropped if they reduce the service area to the ADA minimums. There also might be holes in individual schedules, so their buses won't run as frequently, and paratransit won't be able to take them to medical appointments or those sorts of things. So it's pretty dire there. But we've asked for the same information and won't know what information and who exactly it will impact until they make cuts on bus and rail, because those cuts on bus and rail will be that will directly impact people on paratransit. So it's kind of chicken and the egg. I'm saying that, yeah, there's going to be a large impact, but until the cuts are specifically made to either bus routes or rail lines, we know where people are going to be, but we don't know what the exact impact and who should be notified will be. Go ahead.
Right. I will say, Pat, we do have to put out a list of the proposed cuts.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. But that won't be done till what, February? Yeah.
Correct. Which is when we open it up. I mean, which is when the comment period opens.
Yep,
and I know I can say confidently, because I've been in the meetings, that part of the outreach and sort of pushing out information is, you know, we're trying to figure out a way to make it easy enough for Metro Access customers to figure out what the impact of the proposed fixed route changes would be on their service.
And who will be impacted. But going back to what was just said, you know, nobody has good information on that yet. So we need to know exactly what the specific recommendations are going to be going forward, and we won't get that for another month, maybe. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
make it tougher. Yeah.
If the board sticks to its schedule, you'll know what the proposed cuts are by next week. But then it's going to take us probably a month to put all that information into a digestible form and get it ready to then receive input from people.
So will that information will be published so individuals could look at bus lines and figure out?
It would be part of, if the finance committee, which is who moves this process forward, if we expect them to make a decision as of the current schedule next Thursday. And then the board would make a final approval of a proposed list of reductions and fare increases on the 25th.
Right. The 25th. Okay. So
but the public comment period won't open until under this schedule until mid-February.
Right, but you would maybe know something by, what did you say? Next Thursday?
No, if they stick to their current schedule.
The 18th.
I can't. You know, if I could predict what 8 very disparate people are going to do about a very difficult subject.
Yes.
You know, a week and a half out, I would.
But finance committee would have something by the 18th, and the board would react to it on the 25th.
11th.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the 11th. Yes, sir. The 11th, and if they approve a list of service reduction proposals and fare increase proposals, again, those would have to be laid out specifically by next week.
But you would, okay, that's a better schedule, John, than I had expected.
It's not, I mean, it's not going to be in a format that's particularly user friendly, but you know, a little bit of digging. It's not going to be written in code.
Right. Exactly. Thank you, John. Okay. But Michael, back to where we are, I think for the reasons that you stated and the fact that it does allow for a cap, I think that's a good position to be in. And so my vote is yes. I would go for 20%.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, everybody, Dina, John, Bryna, Cole, everybody else who spoke on this. So here's what I think we should do now. Not seeing any more hands raised, is that I recommend that I propose that the RAC recommend that the board consider a fare increases up to a 20% cap, with the caveat that it encourages additional data regarding impact on the service cut paradigm, and as well as the paradigm regarding more reasonably funded system for long-term purposes, and also with the caveat that the board seek additional demographic data of riders to the extent such data is available. And this proposal comes from, I've been taking a lot of notes from things like Dina has been saying, and Brian, John, everybody else to try to, and Patrick, of course. So that's what I propose. You know, I can call it for a vote now, unless people are diametrically opposed to it. So I can say, do we have a second?
I second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so our recommendation, I'll write it more artfully, but our recommendation passes. So that'll be included in our board our language to the board. And thank you everybody for vigorous debate, productive meeting. That was really helpful, and I think it's good stuff. Not fun, I think, on some of the stuff, but I think that's good. So let's go to adjournment. Does anybody have anything they want to say before we adjourn?
Can I put in one plug?
Yes, sir.
And I've been mentioning this for several meetings, and I will mention it one more time, and then I'm going to reach out to everybody individually within the next day or two. As you all know, we are doing a wayfinding pilot at L'Enfant Plaza. Staff has come to me looking for feedback from you all, and it can come in one of two ways. One, this wayfinding, and I'll lay this all out in an email, so I'll try and be brief tonight. One, the changes to wayfinding are set up to solve specific problems that we have observed with our customers. So way one to provide feedback would be basically you'd be given a list of a couple tasks to complete, and you would video record on your phone completing those tasks and whether or not the new wayfinding was helpful to you. That would be something, you know, if you all want to do it and take a walk through L'Enfant Plaza with your, you know, with your phone, to do in the next couple of weeks. And then sometime between now and the end of the month, there's also the opportunity to go on a sort of a show and tell tour with our communications folks that would, you know, give a broader overview of what these changes are, and then, you know, have a little bit of discussion about how we're collecting data and getting feedback on these proposed changes. So, you know, if there is sufficient interest, we can set up either or both of these things. I will follow up with an email to you all tomorrow.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Please do send the email. So
and I will, and I'm just going to say I will hunt everyone down to get a yes or no if they're interested in participating. So.
Thank you. On that happy note, I move that we adjourn this meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Yes.
All right. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, so much. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.